What we know is that faith and faith leaders and faith institutions are really important in either validating or devalidating the cause that we are advancing.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in New York City.
Faith plays a huge role in interpreting the just or unjustness of what is happening. And so having activated, organized faith communities that are out front and that are making the case in moral and religious terms, they help to insulate movements against repression. They help to ensure that if there is repression, then it is interpreted correctly as unjust. And they play a really important role in kind of framing what is happening in moral terms that are accessible to a broader audience.
On June 14th, the president is planning to celebrate his 79th birthday with a present that we will all be forced to pay for. A multi-million-dollar military parade straight out of a North Korean propaganda film. This is not what democracy looks like, certainly not American democracy. What American democracy does look like is Americans from across the nation coming together wherever they live to publicly declare no kings. Our country has no kings. The No Kings Initiative is led by the group Indivisible, and I'll be talking with Leah Greenberg, co-executive director of Indivisible.
This Memorial Day, from Paulist Productions and executive producer Chris Pratt comes Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey, the gripping true story of former U.S. Army chaplain Justin Roberts. Through the powerful stories from the 419 chaplains who gave their lives in service, including Army chaplain Father Emil Capon, whom Pope Francis brought one step closer to sainthood, and Robert's emotional journey, Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey, brings a stirring tribute to courage, faith, and sacrifice, from the front lines to today. Pre-order now on Apple TV or visit fightingspiritfilm.com.
We need voices like Leah Greenberg's now more than ever. So please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Our library of past conversations includes well over 100 hopeful, empowering, inspiring interviews with guests like Congressman Eric Swalwell, Maggie Siddiqui, the writer Jeff Sharlett, Bishop Marion Buddy, and many, many others. You can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out more at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Okay, before we get to Leah Greenberg, there's just a couple things on my mind that I want to share with you. First of all, I had the honor of speaking at the Human Rights Conference at World Pride in Washington, D.C., with some amazing religious leaders who were really talking about, the intersection of LGBTQ dignity with religion. And, one of the things that I wanted to offer was I feel so lucky, so fortunate that in my life, the religious communities I've been a part of have been, essentially gay affirming, and I, even the kind of milquetoasty church that I went to when I was, a kid, they never preached against gay people, and they had women pastors in the 60s and 70s, which was like very radical because that was really recent. I didn't know any of that. And every church I went to, they were often some of the most radical spaces for LGBTQ inclusion. So that's what I wanted to lift up. That's what I did lift up at the World Pride was I come from a tradition of Christianity where LGBTQ inclusion was part of the fabric of the church. And so when the administration or when people come after LGBTQ people, and they're coming after my tradition. And and the majority of religious Christians in America and religious people writ large in America support LGBTQ rights. So we just have to keep saying that actually when you're attacking LGBTQ rights, you're attacking the majority of religious people in America. So you have to stop it and stop pretending like you're acting out of a morality that represents faith. You're not. You're representing a bigoted form of a tradition. And hey, if you want to exercise that in your own home or in your own church, that's your business. That's freedom of religion. But don't pretend like that gives you license to make policy. So anyway, it was very moving, and I was seated right next to Bishop Marion Budde, who really spoke out, and she represents that tradition, and spoke out to Donald Trump about mercy for LGBTQ and especially trans children and trans people, and as well as immigrants. And so I wanted to share that with you because it was very moving to be in that space. And a big thank you to the Human Rights Conference for including religious voices and letting us be part of the conversation, part of the table. That happened like the day I was speaking. Secretary Hagseth said that he was stripping one of the ships in the Navy, Harvey Milk. It was called Harvey Milk, named after the gay civil rights activist from San Francisco who was assassinated. And it was just so, this contrast and this intentional humiliation and degradation. It was just so disheartening and sad for me, and yet we're just not going to let them win like they're trying. and so I want to share that with you because it really, I was really moved and honored to be there at World Pride in Washington, D.C. and to speak, and then to recognize, wow, these folks are just really, really bad news, and bad news for our community, and bad news for our lives and my family. So anyway, I wanted to share that. And then the other thing I wanted to share is just my deep dismay and sense of outrage at kind of the Muslim ban 2.0 that was announced this week. Something like 12 countries, even more, that are largely from majority Muslim countries, predominantly people of color or Middle Eastern, and basically said, the quote from Trump was just, "We don't want them. We don't want them." I just want to sit with that for a second, because the idea that America doesn't want them is so antithetical to the Statue of Liberty and, give me your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. The idea that this country at its best was a place where people who really wanted to come be part of the American project would be welcome. And it didn't, we've done this kind of cutting off, immigration quotas. We did that in the 1920s. We did that, and it's never looked back and said, "Oh, that was a good thing we did." It's always understood to be rooted in racism, and immigrants make up the richness of our country. If people really want to be a part of America, gosh, the idea that we would just say a blanket to any people, "We don't want you," is crazy. And Trump used the terrible events of the attack on Boulder, the Jewish community in Boulder, and the anti-Semitic attack. He used that as as a rationale for this. Which, by the way, I just want to be clear. Interfaith Alliance joined hundreds of groups, thousands probably, in condemning that attack, and including many, many Muslim groups that condemned that attack. There was universal condemnation of that attack. And so we all are concerned with the well-being of the Jewish community. I'll say that. As all of you know, my cousins are Jewish. I'm deeply committed to the well-being of all Jewish people. Our friends at the JCPA, they're just saying, don't use us this way. You're putting us as your rationale for why you're cutting off immigration from these countries. And again, whether you explicitly mean it or not, you're creating a target. And we're in a terrible moment. And I just think, we have to recognize this is part of a broader playbook, and Interfaith Alliance is saying this is a terrible advent, and we are going to try to fight it with everything we have. And we are also going to lift up, all of the communities in this country who everyone deserves to live safely, to be fully themselves. Hopefully you recognize Interfaith Alliance is in the middle of this, and I feel very passionate about all these issues and wanted to share that with you before this incredible interview with Leah Greenberg. And now to my guest. The results of the 2016 election inspired frustration and fear in many Americans. But for Leah Greenberg, it was an unmistakable call to action. She wrote The Indivisible Guide, which garnered millions of read as a Google Doc. And this led Leah to co-found Indivisible, which quickly grew into a national network of activist groups with more than 1 million members. A former congressional staffer, she co-authored We Are Indivisible, a blueprint for democracy after Trump. Leah has been recognized for her leadership in civic engagement and was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2019. Indivisible is partnering with many groups, and I am very proud to say with Interfaith Alliance, for the upcoming No Kings initiative. And I'm excited to have Leah Greenberg with us this week on The State of Belief. Leah, welcome.
So great to be here.
So, Leah, we heard a little bit about Indivisible. Just bring us back to the 2016 moment, because we're still kind of living that moment, but bring us back to that moment and you're like, oh, wow, I need to figure out a big idea to respond to this moment. Tell us about what your thinking process was and then what Indivisible has grown to mean in the last 8 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so just to go back to that time, at that point, I was a former congressional staffer, as was my husband and now fellow co-executive director, Ezra Levin. We'd both worked on the Hill very early in our careers and then gone on to other things. I worked primarily on human trafficking policy and advocacy. He worked on anti-poverty policy. And we were, like a lot of people, heading into 2016 cautiously optimistic. And then we were horrified and terrified and really concerned that basically everything that we had each worked on and so much of what we cared about in progressive policy was on the verge of being swept away by an incoming Trump administration that would threaten not only the things we'd worked on, but the foundations of our democracy. And so in that moment, we were really looking for answers for how to switch from kind of advancing our policies to building the kind of power that was necessary in order to get to better policies for the longer term. And we found the answer in this wave of organizing that was happening. We were seeing people who had not previously been politically active in our own lives, in our communities, suddenly looking for anything they could do to stop Donald Trump. And we thought, well, actually, we've got some lessons from our early lives. We had been on the Hill during the rise of the Tea Party. We'd seen them organize locally and very effectively to really drag down President Obama's agenda. And we thought, well, we can take the lessons, we can take what we saw, take out the racism and the bigotry and the violence, and turn it into a how-to guide for how do you organize locally in order to stop the Trump agenda. Took that, wrote it over Thanksgiving break, shopped it around to some of our friends and former colleagues for edits, put it out on the internet December 14th in 2016, and we were almost immediately just flooded with people from all over the country. It made its way into the Facebook groups. It made its way into the communities of people who'd already started to organize. It was showing up in the groups of Women's March organizers who were saying, what's next? Suddenly we had just walked right into the center of this extraordinary moment of mass self-led organizing. There were so many people who They needed answers. They were looking for something to do. They were not going to, wait and be guided by Washington, but they were looking for tips on what could work and how to do what they wanted to
Yeah.
do, which was fight for our democracy. And so that's how we got there.
Yeah, and here we are again somehow. I wish your book had been, more permanent after Trump. Instead, here we are again. But what is the constant is people saying, "What can I do?" And I actually think if we could maintain that energy, like kind of forever, like, there's always something to do. We had Rabbi Kleinbaum on this show a couple weeks ago, and she said, nobody can do it all, but everybody can do something. And I think that that's like a real mantra right now. Like we can all do something. And so here we are with Trump 2.0, which is, I would say, more toxic, more calculating, and has already been perhaps more devastating than the entire first 4 years. I mean, we're beginning to see it all come true, but it is very intense. And so talk about Indivisible today, 2025. What does Indivisible look like with this maturation over the last 8 years?
So from 2016 on, we started to build out an organization with the twin goals of supporting grassroots activist communities organizing everywhere, because we believe that that kind of coverage, that kind of leadership by regular people organizing their own communities is really crucial to building up the power to ultimately change our democracy. And then also building out campaigns that allowed us collectively as the Indivisible movement to be more than the sum of our parts when it came to advocacy and legislative fights, when it came to elections, just making sure that we were collectively showing up in ways that were strategic and effective and aligned. And we built out a team that was dedicated to doing that. We pushed really hard, obviously, to get Donald Trump out of office the first time. Once President Biden came in, we pivoted to a focus on the causes that had brought us Trump, right? Thinking about structural democracy reform, thinking about voting rights, the ways in which communities are locked out of political representation, the ways in which our democracy is rigged to systematically advantage the voices of a relatively small, wealthy white few. Having not successfully achieved the conditions to get that across the finish line, we headed into 2024 doing our best to try to pull together a coalition that has really fragmented since 2020.
Right.
And immediately after the election, what I would say is we saw almost immediately, I think there was a popular story about, there's no resistance, there's no opposition, et cetera, et cetera. I certainly got calls from a lot of Politico reporters who were working on some version of that story. That was not what we saw. Like really almost immediately after the election, we saw a lot of sorrow, we saw a lot of fear, but we also saw people looking for answers once again. And so my husband Ezra and I, we left our kids with his mom for a weekend. We went to a cabin in West Virginia, and we wrote an updated Indivisible guide and tried to pull in some of the lessons that we learned, some of what we had seen from the last several years, and really focus on how are we going to collectively use all of the levers, all the places where we have leverage in our democratic system to push back on an incoming administration that is going to be more rapacious, more organized, more deadly than they've ever been. We launched that to 40,000 people the week after the election, right? And from our perspective, we had more Indivisible groups in that November than we'd had. That was the record for new group formation. We have beaten that new group record every single month since. So what we saw was, people were horrified. They weren't shocked the way that they were in 2016 necessarily, but they skipped the shock stage and just went straight to organizing. And so for us, it's been basically just a kind of nonstop, massive explosion of new people getting involved pretty much since the week after the election.
Isn't that good news? I mean, I remember hearing that. I'm not sure who I heard that news from. It might have been from, you. I had heard that and I was like, okay, that's a positive sign. I think people were looking, well, where's the Women's March? Where's that big show of power? And actually, maybe that's not what this moment needed. It really needed kind of organic growth across all of America. And I'll just say, as Interfaith Alliance, it's not quite the same kind of statistics, but, month over month, we are seeing incredible growth. We've had with 300% growth in affiliates just in the last 5 months. All of the indicators of new people joining all of our events are way up. And I think that the opportunity here is actually to build a democracy infrastructure, even as we try to protect our democracy from destruction from inside the house. Up next, much more with Leah Greenberg. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure that you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. My guest is Indivisible co-founder Leah Greenberg. I want to make sure that we get enough time to talk about No Kings, because listeners of this podcast have heard me over the last 3 weeks, month or so, just going, don't forget No Kings, June 14th, it's happening, sign up. So I've been ringing the alarm and the invitation. But why don't you talk about how did that idea come? And I do want to say one of the great things about Indivisible is a sense of integrity to work with you all. There is a real sense you really understand the integrity of the organization, and a collaboration. Every time I've been in a room with Indivisible, where Indivisible is clearly kind of helping gather us, it never feels like fall in line, people, do what we say. It is collaborative. It is, essentially positive. I mean, in the sense of that the hopeful, optimistic, we can do this. We have a lot of work to do. We can do this. But I just want to compliment you, because that's been my experience. And I just am really grateful, because that is also part of what it means to build a democracy, is to figure out ways to work together that feel mutually honoring. And so let me say that. And now turn you to No Kings. How did this idea happen?
Well, first of all, thank you. And I can't let that pass without also noting that it has just been an enormous pleasure to work with you and with the Interfaith Alliance as well. This was something where it was important to us to really think about from the beginning, where is faith at the table, right? And so we've been so pleased to have you be such a central part of it. So No Kings really came out of a couple of threads. The first was we have this overall analysis, right, around the role that at this point we think is important for mass mobilization to play. Now, mass mobilization is a tactic and a strategy, right? It's important for us to not get that mixed up. It's not the be all end all. It's a thing you do to advance some other goals. And early on in the term, to your point about, there wasn't one big protest right during the inauguration or anything. I think there was actually sort of an implicit understanding by a lot of folks, even within our movement, there was some skepticism of protest as the first thing that they went to. And that makes some sense when you think about the way that the elections unfolded, right? So in 2016, Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but did not win the popular vote. The big, massive push of the Women's March, of all of the early protests, was sort of fundamentally undergirded by this sense of this guy is illegitimate, right? He's gotten in because of a fluke of the office, but that doesn't mean he has popular support. So we're making visible the broad opposition, right? And this time around, he did in fact win the popular vote, which, horrifying as it is, puts you in a little bit of a different place narratively, where, if you protest immediately, then it just kind of looks like the people who couldn't get to 51% are still unhappy about it, right? And so what I think a lot of people really focused on for the first couple of months is what's necessary to bring home in communities across the country the toll of what is happening, right? The ways in which DOGE is immediately making our lives worse, the ways in which regular people's experiences are being thrown into chaos by this rapacious administration and folks who are enriching themselves while they degrade our democracy, while they rip away our services. So I think that that was like a lot of the focus, right? From town halls to just direct community outreach and awareness raising. At some point, we felt like it was really important to move into that the kinds of shows of force that mass mobilization can provide. And there was a specific reason why we think mass mobilization is important in this moment, right? Because we are seeing Trump pull out and play the authoritarian playbook step by step. In the authoritarian playbook, you push your own formal powers to the max and you crack down on any alternate source of power or authority in society, whether that is state governments, whether that is the opposition party, whether that is media, higher education, law firms, corporations. What we've seen is an effort to basically force as many actors as possible, and as many people who have some kind of role in upholding some element of liberal democracy, force as many of them into submission as possible. And that chilling effect, I think, has radiated across the country. There's this sense from a lot of, from Columbia to Paul Weiss Law Firm, there's this sense of Trump is inevitable and you've just got to make a deal to secure your place in the new normal. And the role of mass mobilization in a moment like this, with hands off and now with no kings, is to disrupt that sense that this is the new normal, that Donald Trump is inevitable, that he will inherently consolidate his power, and thus you're better off going along, and to really introduce to people the reality that there is a big and bold and growing popular opposition that is everywhere and that is ultimately going to contest for power and push this anti-democratic and authoritarian playbook back. And
Yeah.
and to really kind of introduce that doubt. That's one piece of it. Now, the specific motivation around no kings that I think was really important was we knew that this was coming. Donald Trump has indicated several times that he wanted a parade on his birthday during his first term. We got her word early on that they were likely going to be planning a birthday parade, and, fully against the wishes of the city of DC, obviously, whose roads are going to be shredded by these tanks. Fully against really everybody. Nobody asked for this except for Donald Trump. Let's be real. And
Including, by the way, the army, which is being used as a pawn. And it's really important to say that. Like, I mean, I know you're going to get to this, but it's really important to say that this is all that we're doing now in around No Kings is in no way meant to be
oh,
against the
100%.
army. It's recognizing that actually Donald Trump, for some reason, thinks the army is his personal tributary or whatever. It's like, I mean, he's using them almost as a prop. I mean, this, so I think, continue, but I just think it's really important to recognize, no one asked for this, including the army did not ask to parade in front of him on his birthday.
No, 100%. This is a man who has no sense of honor, no sense of service. He is thinking about the aesthetics of power. He wants something that looks cool. If he had any respect for anything about American institutions or for our veterans, he wouldn't be slashing the hell out of veteran services, right? So what we felt in this moment is, there is going to be this narrative moment coming out of this, and it is either going to be a show of force in Washington, right? A big, bold Donald Trump is in charge kind of signaling and symbol moment, or we can create a contrast around the country. We can say there are communities everywhere that are rejecting these politics of corruption, these politics of strongman authoritarianism, these politics of divide and conquer, that are rejecting the assault on our services in order to deliver another round of corrupt kickbacks to people like Donald Trump, people like Elon Musk. These communities are going to come together, and we're going to show that the power resides with us, not with the theatrics of fascism in Washington, D.C. And so that was really the thinking for No Kings, was we've got to create that contrast. We've got to create and reclaim and demonstrate that power lies with us, the people. American values lie with us, the
Right.
people. What's happening in Washington is not actually representative of where people are. It's not representative of what they want from their government, and it's not representative of who we can be in the future.
Well, and it's also responding to the reality that Trump has actually referred to himself as a king. I mean, he's used that kind of language, which is insane. I mean, so there's that, and really, it's when we're talking, we're having these budget conversations when literally millions of people are going to be pushed off of Medicaid. Millions of people will be hungry. And yet we're having this military parade that could cost $25 million, or they don't even know how much it's going to cost. And then the damage to DC. And so I think it's, the first time I heard it, I was like, makes sense. Because I also I think you mentioned almost this aesthetic, but it's the aesthetic of fascism and, this kind of, oh, wow, he's strong. But then if you, I think maybe even you who said it, like this idea of split screen. You have this vision of Trump, Bone Spurs himself, watching the military go by, and him avoiding and his disrespect to the military. Let's not forget, which has been horrific. Calling basically John McCain, saying I like people who weren't captured. All this kind of stuff. You have this guy on the one hand, and then you have the people on the other. And I just feel like this is so powerful. And I don't think I've had a chance to talk to you. I was in Sarasota to preach the weekend of Hands Off. And I was like, hey, I'm going to be there. And there's a Hands Off Sarasota. This was in Sarasota, Florida. Very, very conservative, very ruby red. I was like, I'm going to go down to the protest. And the minister was like, oh, we'll all be there. And so I saw this whole church community at this hands-off protest. And let me tell you, in Sarasota, they said they had never seen what they saw. Everybody came out. And I think even the Trump supporters who were giving the thumbs down or were upset, they were freaked out because they had assumed that everyone in Sarasota was with them. And to see thousands and thousands. I thought there would be 300 protesters and then 500 counter protesters. It was thousands. I don't even know, maybe 10,000 people in Sarasota lining the streets. It was wild. Anyway, I think this is, this all makes sense. And is there anything you want our listeners really to hear right now, which, I think we want to make sure that everybody understands this is a broad invitation.
Yes.
There's no barrier to showing up. Talk about what you're seeing across the country, because it's amazing how people are showing up already.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Hands Off, I think, and that was obviously a coalition effort, right? We threw in with a bunch of our friends and partners across the progressive ecosystem, with organized labor, with a lot, just a really extraordinary turnout and push by a bunch of folks to make that successful. Similarly, this time around, we're really trying to construct a coalition that brings together a broad coalition, right? We've got faith leaders at the table. Got civil rights organizations, organized labor, veterans. We really want to make sure that we are inviting folks in. And I think it's really important, we're in a time when what the experts tell us, right? What the people who study nonviolent social movements say is you've got to be able to build that big tent that invites people in. Right. You've got to be able to say, we aren't going to agree on everything. And in fact, we're entering a time when the sign that you're serious is that you're building partnerships with people you don't agree with, right? We've got to actually say we don't have to land every single agreement to collectively say that this is not what America is supposed to be. This is not what we're going to stand for, and to start organizing to change it. And so when we think about kind of a no kings frame, it's intended to invite a lot of people in, right? It's intended to be something that you can pick up and make your own. We're not going to say, here's the 10-point policy platform, and you've got to agree to every single one of these in order to march. If you're here because you are furious about the attack on civil rights, great. You should be here because of that. If you are here because you are furious about the attack on Medicaid, you should be here for that. If you are here because you don't want the administration disappearing off the streets, people off the streets, we actually all don't want the administration. We should all hold each other's issues, but we want to be able to say collectively that our futures are threatened by a rapacious, out of control, would-be dictator who does not believe himself to be accountable to the people. And we're all standing together against it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm going to say this several times today, but nokings.org. You can go there. And if you are a faith leader or from a faith community, there's a couple different ways you can interact. You can actually, if your local town I think there's over 1,400 of these events happening around the country, right? I mean, and we're taping this, it'll be, my guess is it's going to get to 2,000. I would be surprised if it doesn't, but if for some reason in your local community, there is not a No Kings demonstration, there is almost zero barrier. You can do it. You can do it. Go to nokings.org. And it lays it all out. Sponsor it, and you can be a faith community. And you can invite everybody to join you. If there's already one of the things that we've been encouraging people to do is like gather together beforehand. Make signs about why your faith actually doesn't want king, because this idea that there's one king and one religious tradition that supports that king that's another part of an authoritarian playbook that we don't have to play by. And that's completely anti-American, by the way. We don't have an established religion. So think about reaching out to other people in your community from different faith traditions, the humanist tradition, any tradition. Say, let's get together beforehand and just lift up our tradition and our moral values about democracy and about diversity and recognizing that we, the people in America, have the power. So I just want to encourage people to go to nokings.org, find a local opportunity. If there isn't one, create one. You do not need permission to do this. Or if you do need, Leah Greenberg, give them permission to do this.
That's right. Look, our movement, Indivisible, we are a movement of local groups of volunteer activists started by people who did not ask permission. They started moving, right? And so we've got about 1,600 events around the country for No Kings right now. We anticipate that number growing significantly over the last week before we go live. You are very much welcome and invited into this movement. And as Paul notes, you do not need permission to get started.
and let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to get to. This is not my statistic. This is our friend Maria Stiffens, who we've heard before. There's a statistic out there. If you can get to 3.5% of the population, is that something you've heard before? Like that it matters actually, that the numbers that come out, it helps. Every person showing up helps because it shows a certain kind of sense of gravity of a movement, that it has a power. Talk about the goal there, that to really try to reach a threshold.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the 3.5 figure is, I think, taking on a little bit of a mythic status, which
it really has. And I'm sorry if
I'm going to go with it. But well, so here's what I would say. I think that it comes from a set of studies around are there specific numbers identified in retrospect, right? That if you hit that level of societal activation, then your cause tends to be successful. It's not the voting threshold you need. Obviously, we need like a majority of voters as well. But it's about kind of like how many people are activated. Now, hands off, right? Big mass mobilization in April. We had about 3.5 million people out, which is to say about 1% of the American population. So we're on our way, right? Now, I think it's important to think about mobilization as, again, part of a broader suite of tactics, right? So we mobilize to shift the narrative. We mobilize to send a message to specific stakeholders across society. We mobilize to create a sense of community and to pull new people in and to absorb them into our movements so that we can deploy and do things and take other actions that further escalate pressure on the different enablers, that further advance our agenda and build strength for the future, right? And so, I think the goal that the way that I often talk about this with folks is, we've got to think of this as running a marathon, right? Or preparing to run a marathon. Like at each step, you're not gonna get out of bed and you're gonna run a marathon tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
You are gonna try and get to a 5K, and then you're gonna try to get to a 10K, and then you're gonna try keep going. Right. We're building muscles here. We're building muscles to mobilize. We're building the kind of connectivity locally that allows us to pull off big things. We are building the kinds of relationships that let us navigate and move through the hard moments, right? we're doing the kinds of things that actually help to stitch together a big, broad, pro-democracy, anti-authoritarian movement in this country for whatever comes next.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super important. That this is about accumulation and movement and what we're building. And I like that, building that muscle. Talk to me, we've had brief discussions about this, but talk to me a little bit about how you understand the role of religion, the potential of it, but also I think it's always like, let's be clear-eyed. There's also potential for divisiveness. So we want to go in clear-eyed about accentuating what is the positive while being aware of some of the pitfalls. What do you see as the positive role that religion can play in movements like this?
Well, I mean, I think we've got a lot of evidence when we look at how societies have how nonviolent movements have defeated authoritarians around the world, and here in America, right? Because the American civil rights movement is like
Right.
the preeminent example of defeating racial apartheid. The What we know is that faith and faith leaders and faith institutions are really important in either validating or devalidating the cause that we are advancing, right? So there's obviously enormous variation in who are those leaders, who are those institutions, what are those bases of power, et cetera. But faith plays a huge role in interpreting the just or unjustness of what is happening. And so having activated, organized faith communities that are out front and that are making the case in moral and religious terms reaches different audiences than I am going to reach as somebody who spends all my time talking about congressional policy and advocacy. They help to insulate they help to insulate movements against repression. They help to ensure that if there is repression, then it is interpreted correctly as unjust. And they play a really important role in kind of framing what is happening in moral terms that are accessible to a broader audience than maybe the people who are taking the action. And so and of course, many of us are in fact, coming in motivated by our faith, right? And so it's not a transactional element to this. It's about asking people to tap into the core values that are bringing them out, and then to use those core values and those beliefs to make legible to a broader audience why our cause is just.
Yeah, I mean, what's always really inspiring is, when you have a little bit more time with someone who's doing really great work and really motivated, and you say, hey, so what's your spiritual background like? Do you have and they eyes light up and say, oh my God, I'm so glad I can talk about that. Often, like, they don't necessarily feel they can bring that into the discussion, but often, like, so many cool people who are doing the work you're doing and others are just like have this really deep religious or spiritual background that either is like they're ongoing, or it's an inspiration that they take from their parents, their grandparents. Like they can call it up. And I think it shows it's like a richness and a resilience that can be so powerful. One of the things that you talked about, like being in coalition with people who you don't agree with on everything. And you also referenced that there have been fractures in the progressive, and we've seen that, and certainly in my work, in interfaith work, and what's happening in Israel, Palestine is present here, and not, by the way, not always in the ways people think. It's not like there are people on all sides of this issue from all different backgrounds, so nothing is assumed. How can we show up with one another even in this important moment when our democracy is at stake, and recognize that there are going to be people who you're just not going to agree with, and you may see representation that makes you uncomfortable. I don't know. I'm wondering, like, I don't know how. I would love for there to be helpful guides on how to like how to stay, even if there's things that other people on No Kings or another activation are showing up with that make you uncomfortable. Or what is your sense of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've got to root ourselves in universal values, right? We are a movement that is dedicated to the dignity of human life. We are dedicated to the equality of all human life. We are dedicated to leaning into love and respect for each other, even when things are really hard. And we also, we have to recognize that this is both this is a movement that requires all of us to stretch, right?
Mm.
Like, I'm Jewish. I am here I'm here because of what has happened to my family in the past. I'm here because of my own religious background. I'm also like very clear that like there is one side in America right now that wants a pluralistic, multiracial democracy where everyone belongs and everyone has a voice. There is one side that does not want that. Those are the teams that we have right now.
That's right.
And our interests, like from very cold and simple and rational calculation, our interests are best advanced by linking arms with everyone else who is committed to that pluralistic, that multiracial, that equitable society where all of us belong and all of us have a voice, and just continually trying to lean in. And again, I think there's a big piece of this is you do want to be rooting in your values. You do want to recognize that these are times and moments when not everybody there's not like one thing you can say that's going to make everybody feel the same way, right? We're an organization that has taken positions and that has campaigned on Gaza, on calling for ceasefire, calling for a ceasing the flow of weapons and assistance to Israel in their campaign there. There's no like one answer that's going to land exactly right for everyone, but we want to take a position that's rooted in a commitment to universal human values. It's rooted in a commitment to civilian life, humanitarian law, the welfare of all, and equality and dignity of all humans. And then we want to try really hard to make everyone feel that there is a place here for them.
I appreciate that. And that is hard work and it's intentional work and in every and so I also invite everyone who is going to a No Kings, and hopefully many of you are now that you've heard Leah Greenberg speak, to also go to show up with your best self, with that in mind, and recognize that you do have control over how you show up and the tone that you will set, and I just invite everybody in all of our dealings to recognize how important that is. Do you have any sense of what is? I mean, I know, isn't this mean? This is like, at the Olympics, someone has just won a gold medal, and they're like, "So what's next for you?" It's like it's the most annoying question. Like, just let me like do this thing right now. But I'm curious, are you already imagining like, kind of how we build upon whatever success happens on No Kings, and inviting more people into this broad movement of Indivisible plus plus plus?
Well, I'll just quote my personal favorite sign that I've seen show up organically about No Kings, which is if there's money for a parade, there's money for Medicaid, because I think that is the fight that we have to
Yeah,
invite people into, right? There
yeah.
is at this moment an absolute monstrosity of a Republican budget that would gut SNAP, gut Medicaid, take aim at the poorest folks in our society, but also hurt all of our healthcare in the process, right? Because those are our hospitals, those are our insurance premiums. Everybody is hurt when we knock out the social safety net. And we got to fight back. We got to limit the harm. We got to hold those folks accountable who are trying to move this. And that's happening right now, right? Like that is happening in the month of June. They want to move this legislation by early July. We got to be all in to make sure that these folks are not able to pass this unbelievably dangerous legislation that will really strike at the heart of the social safety net here in America. And we got to make sure that everybody knows what's at stake.
Right. I mean, what's been clear over the last few days is that even the Republicans in the House who voted on it don't know what's in the bill. So, I mean, it's I appreciate that so much. And I just want to say one more time to everyone, go to nokings.org. This is an opportunity to show up. A lot of you have been asking me, like, what can I do? This is something to do. It really does matter. And I'm so grateful to you, Leah Greenberg from Indivisible. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
It's such a pleasure to join. Thank you. And show up on No King's Day.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I will be in conversation with author, commentator, and activist Wajahat Ali. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.